everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Infosec Sidekick podcast. It's me, Travis, here with episode number 2. Really excited about this one. Obviously because it's the second episode, and I'm still pumped to start this for everyone and explore different career paths and success, stories within cybersecurity, hopefully for your benefit. Um, and today I have a guest with me, Jon Stinnett. Did I pronounce that right? I don't know. We'll find out in a second. Probably not. But we met recently through a mutual friend, and he may or may not have already been on this podcast. So that's not very hard to deduce based on the 2 episodes we're currently having. But we kind of immediately clicked. So I'm really happy that he's here today. I think he's passionate about, sharing some experiences he's had to maybe help some of you out there in a very particular situation. So with that, I'd like to welcome Jon Blank.
Thanks, Travis. Yeah, you can go either way. Stinnett. Sometimes I go Stinnett so that I can say I'm Stinnett to win it.
There you go.
But yeah, we'll go Jon Stinnett. So thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Just a little bit about my background. I've been in the cybersecurity space about 10 years. The last 3, a little over 3 of which was on the sales engineering side. And then prior to that, sort of your typical working for an enterprise, information security analyst, information security architect. So happy to be here to discuss a little bit about that transition and how that went. And hopefully if there's anyone on the fence or thinking about that, there's some key takeaways for them here.
Awesome. Yeah. And I know the first time we chatted, um, I kind of expressed this on the fenceness myself, right? Where I was, we talked about this in the last episode with Matt Williams about, people who maybe enjoy the more personable side of, conversations and relationship building. Now, while that still exists in almost every other, job in cybersecurity or any discipline, I think it's definitely more so relevant in the sales world and the vendor side of things. So I really appreciate you coming on and providing your views on this and giving some tips to everyone out there, including myself. So with that, let's get right into it. I like to start off every interview we have talking about your educational experiences, whether that was college or, certifications or courses that you took. I know there's a lot of non-traditional paths to getting into cybersecurity now, and people are more open to that. So it's not just college, but if that is what it was for you, I'd really like to explore a little bit about, what kind of degrees you were looking at and, how that all started and getting your first role within cybersecurity.
Yeah, how did I break in? I definitely took what I would call a non-traditional route. Uh, I had sort of the Tommy boy route to college, where he says, lots of people go to school for 9 years or whatever. No, so I started off, went to Purdue University. It was not related to cybersecurity, computer engineering back at that time. Kind of fell away, did other things, right? I was always into information technology. Some of my early jobs were like a level 1 type help desk, I guess you would call it, come fix my printer, put the toner back in, help me do various tasks, those sort of things. And I sort of happened into cybersecurity by chance, responded to an ad that a company was looking for someone to come help them in on a project. It was actually an encryption rollout. So putting whole disk encryption on laptops, doing some encryption for email exchange. It's supposed to be a temporary thing to roll that out. Got into that, got my feet wet on the project, showed some skills, did a good job on that, and it sort of evolved from there. Now, as I took that and started to move up in that path, I then started to look, I finished my degree, finally did it. And then I did look to some certifications just to help me learn a little bit more about that industry. Things like started off with just like security plus things like that, and eventually moving into things like CISSP, um, CCSP for the cloud security practitioner. So those definitely did help me make that jump internally, sort of from what I would call that contractor or junior analyst, then to moving up to a more senior analyst through that side of the house. So it was somewhat of a right place, right time, but then taking that opportunity, being prepared, and then seeing, hey, this is a good place to be. How can I now further this through continuing education, continuing work?
Right, right. And I think one of the things that stood out to me in your story was that you kind of got that kind of help desk role, right? Um, that's really my number one piece of advice for anyone trying to break into security, right? Like no one's going to hire you off the street, having no kind of core technical job, right? Like these are really important things that we're handling on a day-to-day basis, and you kind of need to know the foundations of technology and working with people. Um, Side note, that's also my first foray into cybersecurity. So I'm sure there are a lot of people out there, just real quick clip, go try and find a help desk job, contracting position, uh, or part time or whatever, just to get that base level experience. And I'd be willing to bet that, you know, you, so did you stay with that company kind of and grow within that one company, or did you move from that first position to another company?
So I was there for 6 years. So I came in. It was a contracting company that was not directly to that job. And then after some time in that role, the actual employer decided to move me off contractor and hire me full time into that position. And then I stayed for 6 years. And again, that was, so if you're looking to crack in, nowadays it might be a little different, but when I was doing it, it was sort of like you said. I knew at the time I didn't have any experience, so I was just trying to get a foot in the door. It might not have been the ideal situation or what I thought in my mind was going to be the ideal situation, but you have to look for those opportunities, and then once you're in, prove yourself. And that's what I tried to do. So yeah, I ended up staying for 6 plus years.
Nice. And when they hired you, had you graduated or got your degree yet, or was that even before then?
That was, I did not have my degree in place yet. No. So when I got transitioned from the contractor, I did not have the degree yet. I did not have any of those certifications yet. So I just kind of did proved myself through the work for the first couple of years. And then once it got to a point where it was like, okay, let's start going deeper into this realm. Like, hey, do we want to put you on our internal cyber threat hunting team? Okay, let's start looking at some specific skill sets and certifications and areas to push through, to then get into that next realm.
Sounds like you had a pretty awesome manager.
I had some
Uh,
really good managers. I had so one of the things I also want to mention is try to find a mentor if you can. I've been lucky in that regard that I've had actually a handful of people that I latched onto, and I looked at them and I said, they are successful in the way that I want to be successful. We think the same way. I like their mentality. I like their work ethic. I like the way they approach things. And, don't be shy about learning from other folks like that who have been there and done it, because it will be invaluable to you in your career. And it certainly has been for me. Like I said, I've had a couple folks who I can just call up and say, hey, this is where I'm at. This is what I'm thinking about. What are your thoughts? Kick things around. So if you can find someone like that in an infosec type career that's been there, done that can give you tips, pointers, and just keep you pushing along, like I said, that's been invaluable for me.
Yeah, and I think, you're qualified to say that probably because you've experienced that firsthand, like you said. But also, you and I both know that, having been in the industry a while, if there's someone we really believe in and we've built a relationship with, we have contacts. It's a small industry, and
Mhm.
we get to see those opportunities as they come up, and mentors can really help point you in the right direction. Help you get a foot in the door because you might not be approaching a company with a lot of experience or
Sure.
um, you know meet inside your resume, and that recommendation or that drawing a blank on the word, but that piece of your resume can, having that name there just to back you and vouch for your character and your drive is really important. So I'm glad we kind of pivoted there because I think that's really valuable, uh, not only for people breaking into security, but people who are mid senior level trying to take it to the next thing. I mean,
Mm.
I'm not a director or, a AVP of anything, but I would imagine it's the same thing, just kind of going up that totem pole, right? Of, just evolving your mindset and looking for that next person. And I'm not saying you want to bounce from person to person just for your own gain, but if, you're trying to move from manager to senior manager, get into that director space. I imagine it's really helpful to just know someone and talk to someone on a regular basis who is a director, right?
No,
Um,
100%. And I think we'll get into this a little bit, but yeah, those mentors are in different spaces, right? My first one was someone who was, you know, full in on the technical side, technical deployments of security for an enterprise. And then when I moved to sales, I had different mentors, right? These were people that had been around the block in a sales career, 10, 15, 20 years, had been in a lot of different companies, seen a lot of different tactics. So yeah, you're right. You're going to find different people depending on where you're trying to pivot or where you want to go. It's not necessarily going to be the same folks the whole way through. So and you'll know pretty quickly when you get in there, who do you bond with, who, like I said, who do you see as being successful in that field, and hopefully they're willing to reciprocate that. I guess I've been lucky in that I've found people who've been really willing to help. Maybe not everyone's that way, but I think most people would be. You need to take some initiative in setting that up and asking them and having those sit downs with them.
yeah, great insight, man. Thanks for going there. But let's kind of keep the conversation rolling here. So you mentioned sales a few times, but before we get to that, and that's kind of the theme of the episode, we'll really get to in 5-10 minutes. But when you moved up, contracting position, hired, you're still kind of in this help desk. Where did you end up? I mean, you spent 6 years, I think you said there.
Mhm.
You went on this track doing, company security stuff.
Mhm.
Tell me a little bit about your positions and your experience there, and if that also expands into like other moves in your career, then we can go there too.
Yeah, it's all kind of on this, I guess what you would call an individual contributor track, right? Kind of starting at what I would consider that L1 level, where you're sort of that first tier, low level responsibility. And then I ended up in a senior level security position. So now you have gotten yourself to a point where you're trusted by the organization, you're trusted by the, your management team, the C level, to a point where they're looking at your opinions to go in and inform them on what's going on. For me specifically, from an information security perspective, like, hey, where do we have gaps in our company, where are we lacking, what sort of projects do we need? So at a certain point you get yourself to where you become a trusted advisor in that role by proving yourself, at that level one tier. And as you get more and more opportunities, people will generally recognize those who work hard and are able to put in the effort, and who can articulate things in a good way, who have a good personality. And it's a lot of different skills that mend together, but people will notice that. And sometimes you might think that you're just drifting along, but people are paying attention. And so, yeah, eventually, like I said, you get yourself into that position where you're kind of calling more of your shots.
Nice, yeah, and that took a decent chunk of time, right? It didn't happen overnight.
Oh, that,
Um,
I mean, yeah, there's working weekends in there. There's working off hours because you know you are committed to that project or whatever's going on for that company. You know as well as I do, when you work in that space, anything in IT or security, it's not between like 9 to 5 generally, right? You do different things that you can, but there's always fires that come up. So being able to just show your commitment to it, and be there, and those things don't happen all the time, right? So you have to be able to be fluid and adjust to those situations. And again, those are the type of things that people end up respecting. Now, I'm not saying that you should not have a balance or a family life or kill yourself trying to work all the time, but when those situations do come up and you have a real passion for what you're doing and you want to do a good job, you kind of don't really think about it as extra work. You just go get it done.
Yeah, and you know, those are also opportunities to shine, right? Like,
Mhm.
especially in my world inside incident response, those are truly like your golden moments are the fires that come up, and
Yep,
that's you know some people live for that stuff, and I tend to live for that. So, you know, I get excited when that happens. I'm, eager to jump on the calls after hours to try and solve a situation. And there's a lot of people like that. And I imagine part of your you know journey from contractor up to, was it architect? Were you becoming kind of like on the architecture track?
that's right.
Yeah, so like up to that point, you were exploring all those different feelings you were having throughout those, different IT events and security, reviews and this and that, and working with a bunch of different people. And hopefully you were just kind of following that path that led to the most happy scenario for you, where like the right stuff um, was taking place, and you were kind of enjoying yourself there. Um, so so you went into, you kind of grew into this architecture position within cybersecurity. Um, I mean, we could talk about that a little bit. What types of, if you're prepared to talk about this, I mean, like, what types of projects would you be typically working on?
Yeah, so this is what, 6, 7 years ago. Some of the conversations might still be relevant today, but it's things like might even be more relevant today. But enterprise-wide projects of, let's say, adding in um, multi-factor authentication. How do we secure a remote workforce? Right, conversations that had been started taking place back then that are even more relevant today. Um, and then so really being able to be the set of eyes from the security perspective that comes in and looks at how those are getting implemented into the broader picture of the enterprise. So there's always uh, hundreds of components that are working together, right? How is this looking from our network side? How is this going to affect our user productivity? And sort of being that individual that can sit in, look at both sides of that and say, okay, how do we get this in efficiently, but how do we also do this securely? Because you can, if you're in a rush for projects, you can put things in um, maybe somewhat ineffectively without thinking about all the potential security ramifications. So that's how I sort of view that architecture role. You're sort of that overarching person looking over the different projects to make sure that nothing is getting missed that's going to compromise or add risk to either the company or the users.
Nice. So yeah, great. So you've been doing this. You're on the architecture track. Obviously, there's a lot of places to go from there, inside of organizations. You're building, especially inside an organization. You're building that internal knowledge. You're building, the reputation of getting things done, finishing projects, and working with multidisciplinary teams, in IT development, user experience, business
Mhm.
side. So you're gaining a lot of that valuable experience to kind of move into a more, management role, something like that, if you want to stay on the technical track. But you took a pivot. And this is
Yeah.
where I really, really am excited to talk about, because you did something that, I mean, I don't want to downplay. Obviously, people do this, but in my world, and I'm sure a good amount of other people, you don't always, like, you think of the sales people and the vendors, and they're it's a different type of person, right? Like, or at least I think of that. Um,
Okay.
I think, you know, what I just want to explore what planted that bug in your head of like moving into a sales organization. Now you've stayed on the technical track, which is,
Mhm.
I think, a really important piece of your story. But talk to me about those types of conversations you were having with yourself before you made that decision, and when you made that decision.
So honestly, for me, it was not necessarily. something that I was even thinking about. I was staying on the track that I was on. Yeah, I had no thoughts really about moving into sales. Sort of how it went down was when you're in that position on the other side of the table, you have the vendors coming in. Obviously, you're purchasing products, you're establishing those relationships, getting to know those folks. And I just happen to have a pretty good relationship with one of my sales and SE teams for a particular vendor. Um, and just really got along with those guys. And what ended up happening was I had heard or I had seen, come across that one of these sales positions was open at a place where I knew these guys. And it came up to me initially, and my right away I said, no, I'm not interested. Like without even thought, I was just like, no, I don't think it's really something I want to do. And they were kind of like, okay, think about it. And so that is actually the scenario that planted the seed. And I said, well, okay, well, what could this be like? Is this something that I would enjoy? So here's where one piece of advice I would give is that I shot that down immediately. And I would say that's not a smart move. I would say always, at least consider an opportunity or options. Think about what it might hold because you never know what's going to happen. And for me, it was one of those great things. So that's just one little thing I would say on that. Yeah, it sort of just evolved from there. And then I started to think about things like how I wanted my lifestyle to be. Obviously, it's different now, but at the time, it's like, okay, do I want to be um, sitting in my cubicle or whatever, 9 to 5, or do I want to have a little more freedom? Do I want to be traveling? Do I want to be able to meet a bunch of different people? There's a lot of different things that I think we'll get into about what sales looks like. But yeah, so I wasn't really thinking about it. It was another one of those things that sort of came in front of my path and that I initially rejected, but then said, wait a second, let's explore this. And it turned out to be a good thing.
Yeah. And I kind of wanted to correct myself. I think when I was talking about, my perspective on salespeople, it was really, I was really more talking about the stigma, and we talked about this with Matt, in episode one, the stigma that sales, particularly bad salespeople have. I think all of us within cybersecurity have really strong relationships with the vendors that we actually
Mhm.
use and need within our organizations. So that wasn't an entirely representative comment that I made earlier. Um, but but yeah, thank you for just explaining that mindset. And I find it really interesting that you just shot it down immediately. um, and then that your advice to people would be, at least explore it. Like, what do you have to lose, right? I think, think about what it is you really want in your career. And just because something doesn't sound right, when you first hear it, doesn't mean that it's not the one
Well,
or the right.
yeah, for me, it was fear, right? It was what do I know about sales? What do I've never done this. I don't, is this, it's scary. I don't know. But thinking about it, and if you're in the type of position where, let's say you're an analyst or you're on the architecture team and you have to have a relationship with your internal management teams or your C-level teams, you're kind of somewhat in sales already. You might not think of it that way, but you are giving a pitch to them about your design or your recommendation and why it needs to be this way. So you are always kind of selling to someone. You just don't really view it. Back when I was on the other side, I was doing those things, right? I had to take my project into a review board. I had to have a whole presentation. I had to have everything laid out. I had to have diagrams. I had to have reasoning, budgets, right? So you don't view it at the time that you're selling, but you really are. And I think a lot of people are doing that today, and they might not even realize it. So those sort of skills can translate into that career.
Yeah. Really quick comment on that. Uh, all the places I've seen recently are either hardcore into or are in the process of transitioning to a service based kind of construct of providing, internal security services. So
Mm.
like, an incident response service or a security operations service. And really, the concept of selling and like back charging and all that kind of stuff is already rampant and wildly successful within most companies now. So I think that's a really good point, about those skills kind of transitioning. That is something I wanted to talk about because, um, you've been successful in that transition to sales. Uh, just to reemphasize, what were some of those key skills that you kind of used and developed to make yourself successful in that transition?
Yeah. Well, I think as you talked about in the beginning, it's important to have an understanding of the industry and the technology and that technological background. So that's always going to be first and foremost, especially in a sales engineering role. You have to be able to stay abreast of what's going on, in the news and hot topics and trends. So that's kind of number one, right? And then it's not really a requirement, but I would say that it's helpful to have, or at least try to work on your soft skills in terms of how good are you at communicating with people? How do you feel about presenting in front of live audiences? One of the big things about this type of role, in a more traditional time, you're out, flying around or driving around, visiting um, different teams, presenting to, sometimes it might be 5 people, sometimes it might be 100 people. Maybe you're presenting at a conference. So those are all things that are going to have to be in the back of your mind that you're going to have to be doing. The other thing I would say is that you need to have a little bit more of a sense of an independent drive. There's not always going to be a specific outline for how you get this type of job done. You'll basically know, like, I have accounts and I need to be active with them. Okay, go. So being able to have a creative spirit, being able to come up with creative ways to get information in front of people or display information in maybe a not as traditional way. And then communication, right? There's going to be a synergistic relationship between you and your sales counterparts or your account managers or your sales managers. So you have to be comfortable being able to communicate effectively, efficiently, um, constantly. Got to stay in sync with everybody, make sure you're on the same page. So being able to effectively spell out your message and your thoughts to other people on the team is very important. So those are kind of, there's a lot more, but those are kind of the initial ones that bubble to the top of my head.
Cool. Yeah, thank you for that. So you are currently a channel sales architect, is that right?
That's right.
Yeah. So, I'm not a very smart guy, I guess, because, you know, when I hear channel sales architect, I know what two of the three words mean,
Yeah.
sales and architect.
Yeah.
But me, I'm not very sales savvy. What does a channel sales architect do?
Sure. So in terms of if you're working for a vendor, I'll simplify it into two things. There's a sort of a field direct sales, and that would be, so I'm working with you, Travis. You are my client, my customer. I have a direct relationship with you. I'm learning about your problems, trying to see how I can help solve them, with my product or service. What the channel does is we actually work with trusted advisory partners. So I wouldn't necessarily work directly with you, Travis. You might have a company that you bring in that takes a look at your whole architecture or assessments or whatever it might be, and you're looking to them for guidance on how they can solve those issues. So my role in the channel is to work with those trusted advisory partners and say, hey, here's my company, here's what we do, here's the problems that we help solve. Really establish a tight relationship with them so that they can use that knowledge, that when they go back to you, they can say, oh, hey, Travis, you have this issue. you know I have this great solution to your problem. So I am kind of working through them in sort of this third party way as opposed to directly with you. So that's
Interesting.
this simplified way of how I would describe a
So
channel.
we don't have any affiliations with any companies right now, but just so I can understand this better, would that be like an Octave or something like that?
Absolutely.
Cool,
Yes.
cool. All right. Yeah, that just helps me understand. I just wanted to make sure that's where I was going, but for folks out there that work with maybe Optiv, for instance, that would help them understand. So gotcha, gotcha.
Yeah,
Okay,
there's many partners out there. I'm not
Yeah.
saying any names of partners or companies here.
Fair enough.
Pleading the
I'll do
fifth.
that. I'll do that for you. So,
Okay.
um, but yeah, let's keep going. So that helps a lot to understand that. I mean, this is just something I was thinking of. I mean, do you do you see maybe like a difference? Obviously, there's a difference between field and channel. Should one type of person be looking towards one over the other? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And if you were to ask me, so I moved directly into the channel role, so I don't really have experience in the field role. I would say they're very similar. They're mostly similar. Um, you yeah, you're doing the same things, right, as an engineer. It's just you're not facing directly to the customer, you're going through a third party. So in terms of a personality that might choose field or channel, that's kind of a hard question to ask. I think you need some of the skills that we talked about earlier in the episode. You need all of those things to be successful in both roles. um, the one thing I would potentially say is you could have a potential for more salary upside in a field role. You have a more, I guess, maybe direct quota, so maybe some more potential to go a little higher. That might be a key difference if it's a monetary thing that drives you. Personally, one thing I love about the channel is I love being able to cover somewhat of a larger territory. I like to be able to fly to different areas. So if you're more in a field, you're going to be, let's say we're in Orange County, right? You might be Orange County and you have your accounts. Whereas for me, someone in the channel, I might have the West territory. So I could fly to California, I could go up north, I could go to Texas, I could have partners in different places, right? So you get an opportunity to travel a little more, meet a lot of different people. So there are some differences there. But for the most part, the skills that you would need or the personality, I would say they're mostly similar.
Cool. Um, how much? I mean, I guess it depends on the company you work for, but do you do you feel that you get to flex your cybersecurity muscles enough? I mean, obviously you're going to change positions. There's going to be different responsibilities, and those can be kind of presented to you up front.
Mhm.
But for someone who was working in a technical discipline, internal security architecture, um, do you do you feel like there should be an expectation there, or since you're moving into sales, that you know you might not be able to scratch that technical itch as much? I just want to explore that a little bit, because I think that's something that people should be aware of if they're looking to make that transition.
I would say it definitely depends on a couple factors. Like you said, what company am I going to? Am I going to a vendor that has a very specific focus, one or two products, one or two things that I'm going to have to be responsible for? Or am I going to a large player that has a whole platform of 80, 90 products under the umbrella? And the major difference there being if you're going to option two, which is the large platform play with all those products, you cannot be expected to be deep technical in all of those, and nor does anyone expect you to be. You kind of have your maybe top three, four, five where you're like the guy you dive into. Um, and if you go to a smaller company that's one product, obviously, you know what you have to do, right? Um, in terms of scratching that itch, I think one of the major things is it becomes more of an architectural conversation, I think, as opposed to maybe going into the nitty gritty. And what I mean by that is you're sitting down, let's take channel for example. For me, you're going in with these partners and you're having that pre-sales exploratory conversation about, I have this client, here's what their network looks like, here's the diagram, here's the issues that we're having. So it's more of that sort of approach of um, being able to solve the problem, or like how do we fit in there to solve the problem, as opposed to actually going in and technically deploying and break fix type of thing. So I would say it's a little different of a mentality in those terms from the actually hands-on skill set. I'm not saying you don't get to do that. You absolutely do. You're going to get to, you're going to be having your own home labs. You're going to be playing around with the software, with the toys. Um, it's just maybe not, it could potentially not be as deep depending on, like I said, the company or your specific role or your specific group. But there also are positions where you could absolutely, you know, still kind of flex those muscles. So at the
Yeah.
end, it depends.
Yeah, and it's really hard. I mean, I find myself having a lot of questions that I want to ask. Just want to be careful because there's so many different types of sales positions, and it really seems to vary from company to company.
Yeah,
One of the things I was going to ask is like, do you get to handle everything from pre-sales to post-sales? And I'd imagine that you can answer that question, but correct me if I'm wrong. There would still be like an asterisk there that's like, in my current role I do, but sometimes you might not, sometimes you would, right?
I would say generally you would not. Most of the functionality of at least my type of role is there's a distinction. So I'm pre-sales, right? So your job is right the more high level. What is the issue? Architect the problem, see where there's a fit, run the POC. So that's where you're going to get your hands dirty, right? Do the proof of concept, get things up and running in the environment, uh, document the use cases, make sure they work. And then there can be somewhat of a handoff there, right? We've made the sale. This has gone in, and maybe that goes to then a delivery team. Maybe that goes to a partner to help run that. Maybe that goes to the vendor has an internal delivery team that they hand that off to that kind of really handles the nitty gritty there. Now, don't get me wrong. There's times where you're going to be pulled into a post sales conversation. There's something's going on. There's a trouble ticket open. You need to be involved in that, but you're kind of like more of a main point of contact at that point. You're a facilitator, making sure everything gets done. You're not necessarily on the keyboard fixing it out.
Gotcha. Awesome, man. Last question. Um, so what, because I want to be respectful of your time.
Sure.
One of the things that I like to end every episode on, I think, is just more of a focus on, mental health, happiness, within cybersecurity and the roles that you're taking and just the career path that you're on in general. And it's kind of like a two-pronged question. Um, One, I want to ask you from your, just your point of view, when someone should consider moving into a sales position, from a kind of more inside technical role, and just you know I,
Yeah.
that primarily, but I also mix in there what made you happy. Like what's your happiness level in this current role compared to your others, and if you want to break that into two answers, we can. Didn't mean to mess that up too much.
I might get in trouble. This might be the answer that I get in trouble on. I don't know. We'll see. Um, okay. I can only speak from personal experience. I would say potentially well, let's say you've hit sort of a cap in your current role. Maybe there's nowhere else for you to go. You can't elevate anywhere. It's just not going to happen, or it's not going to happen in the near future, and you're looking for something else. Maybe sometimes it can be political. Maybe there's a bureaucracy in your company. Maybe there's always a bunch of red tape that you got to try to get through, and you feel like you're just stonewalled on all your projects, and you are just doing your damnedest to like be the security guy, and you want to help, but it's just falling on deaf ears. So there's potentially a political aspect to it. Sometimes it's just you want to try something new. Also, like I said, if you are the type of person who maybe wants to flex some more creative muscles, maybe you're technical, but you also have a creative piece of you. I know a lot of folks who are technical that they don't quite fully scratch the itch because there's this other piece of them. And you and I had this conversation where we want to create too. There's this other thing that gives us joy in conjunction with that. And you can do that in sales, right? You're creating presentations, you're creating, like I said, you have a lot of runway to get things done the way you want to do. So there's a lot of creativity. So those would potentially be my top three or four things. If you're feeling that way, maybe it's something to explore.
Awesome. And I know I said I was going to end, but I did really want to touch this. You brought it up. Um, but it's that, you know, that creative itch, right?
Mhm.
Um, One of the things that I was feeling when we first talked was that, you know, inside of our industry, whether it's true or not, sometimes I personally felt that I didn't have the on switch that everyone else had when it came to like researching, setting up the home lab every single night when they get home from work and just digging and researching and doing all this stuff. Um, for the longest time for me, that was like a real, you know, put me in a tailspin, mentally until I was able to like literally talk about it, with you, which is super recent, by the way, like,
Mm.
um, and just to be able to accept that maybe you have that underlying need for something, you know, beyond and next to that technical component. And it seems like for some people, a lot of people maybe, that taking that jump into a sales position might be the answer for them. Like it might be the thing that takes you from like mediocre to potentially really, low happiness levels in your current role to just being like, on top of a mountain. It's not going to be the same for everyone, but I think it was really important to just explore that piece of it. I don't know if you had any, additional thoughts on that.
No, I agree. I'll add one thing for people maybe thinking about it, not to kind of put more of a sour note towards the end, but I think it's important. It's not all like sunshine, right? If you're there can be pressure. There's a lot of pressure in sales, right? You're working for your job. You have a base salary, you have commission, you have to make things happen to make the additional money. There's going to be people leaning on you and wanting answers, wanting updates, and it's not going to always be glorious. So people should just also keep that in mind that if you don't deal well with that type of pressure. Now that's a lot harder on an actual sales guy than an engineer. The engineer will feel some of that pain, maybe not as hard as a sales guy, but you're going to be involved in it. Um, but I was just thinking about that. Like, I don't want to make it sound like, hey, everyone just go to sales
Yeah.
and it's like the greatest thing ever. Like, there's things that aren't. I'm not gonna say it's not great, but there's things that are different maybe from like a traditional type of job, like different types of pressures that people should be aware of and think about. Like, okay, will I be able to handle that, or is that something that's just going to make me angry and I don't want to deal with that? Because people have those thoughts too. So, not to put a sour thing here at the end. So, let's figure out a way to wrap it up nicely.
Yeah. Yeah. Not a sour thing at all, John. I think that's the perfect level set just to round things off because, you know, on this show, I don't want to be overly optimistic about anything. I don't want to be underly optimistic about anything. I want to explore the realness of these types of challenges that people are facing and the roles that people have. Um, you know, I think that was a perfect round off. It's something that people should expect if they're in the role, if they're thinking about getting into the role. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up. So with that, I think we're good to kind of call it here. John, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you on the second episode. I can't thank you enough for, agreeing to this show that has right now no following.
I
Hopefully,
follow it. You got
yeah,
one at
man.
least. It's gonna
Yeah,
explode.
I appreciate that, and just for all of you out there who watched and are listening right now, thank you so much for tuning in to the Infosec Sidekick podcast. This is a show all about making you the hero of your career. As cheesy as that sounds, we're just here to help you like a sidekick would. Um, subscribe to wherever you're listening, to keep up with the next episodes. We have some really, really awesome guests coming on. Like actually really shocked and super excited to the amount of people that are like agreeing to come on this show. At the time of this recording without having any idea of what I sound like or the stupid questions I ask. So thank you to John, especially for coming on, and taking some time out of your day in your nice, beautiful mountain home
Oh
um,
yeah.
to
See, this
hear.
is what the sales gets you. a virtual
Exactly.
background. No, appreciate it, Travis. Thank you so much. It was awesome. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, no problem, John. All right, take care.